My Lords, I'm grateful to the noble Lord, Lord Foster of Bath, for his introductory remarks. He makes some important points. The points I'm going to make are slightly different. I rise to speak to the four amendments in this group standing in my name, 441, 443, 444 and 446. And I do so with the cross-party support of other members of the Built Environment Select Committee, as you will see from the names subscribed to the amendments, and I'm glad to see various noble lords here who are members or have been members of that committee who may wish to speak in this short discussion, this short debate, which is principally focused on the government's proposals in this bill to empower itself to introduce a national registration scheme for short-term let properties. These amendments arise out of a short inquiry conducted by the Built Environment Select Committee last year, in which we looked at the effects of Airbnb and similar type properties on various localities. It was chaired, in fact, not by me at that time, but by my noble friend, Lady Neville Rofe. We reached, as committees tend to, we reached some conclusions that we agreed on, and of course we had various questions that we wanted to ask the government about the national registration scheme, which by then we were aware they were bringing forward and proposing, and which they clearly see as crucial as central to their approach to dealing with the problems that have been identified. One of the things we were able to agree on, and here I part company slightly with the noble Lord Foster of Bath, as was mentioned in a debate in committee only 2 days ago, we were able to agree that while there was a problem, the evidence showed us that it was quite localised. It's a problem that existed in particular types of localities, densely popular urban areas like central London, holiday areas. We did not see the case for a compulsory national registration scheme. We did see a case for local authorities in areas that are adversely affected to be empowered to have a registration scheme that they could apply locally. But beyond that, we had a number of questions. Now, we put our views and our questions in a letter to the government, as one does, and we addressed it, thinking we were doing the right thing, to the Secretary of State at the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. The first surprise we had was that we were told after a little while that the reply we were to receive would in fact come from a different department. It would come from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. So the first question I have for my noble friend when she comes to reply to this is if she could explain to the House quite clearly why a scheme so closely identified with the Secretary of State at DLUC should in fact be handled in policy and implementation terms by a totally different department. It's entirely up to the government, of course, to decide how to manage these things. But I think noble lords will want to know who, so to speak, is in charge and where they should be turning to if they have views on the matter. Now, we received a reply, as I say, from a minister at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which was slightly odd in some ways. First of all, he appeared to think that the bill before in this committee today had already been enacted, and that it had, of course, passed. It had, of course, passed the Commons at that stage, and that may have been the cause of his confusion. But I know that noble lords here present would want him to be aware that the bill is far from enacted, and in fact is further from being enacted at this stage in committee than it possibly was on the first day on which we sat to consider it. And the bill that emerges may yet not be quite the bill that the minister thinks is in force. But this will all be sorted out for him, I'm sure, by his officials. He referred in his reply to the call for evidence that the government issued last year. And here I'm grateful to the noble Lord Foster of Bath for bringing this up. He referred to it. He said the government had gone out and had called for evidence, but he gave no explanation as to why we still have not seen, months later, the evidence that was submitted as a result
of the evidence
of that call.
Yeah.
And it would be immensely helpful to your lordships, I'm sure, in considering this particular aspect of the bill, to know what the evidence was that the government received. So my second question to my noble friend before she, when she comes to a reply, would be if she's able to tell us when we are going to see the evidence that was submitted to the government last year, with any conclusions that the government might have drawn from it at this stage, and whether in particular noble lords will have an opportunity to see it before we arrive at report stage of this bill, or indeed, what would be very helpful, while we are still in committee. Because the essential thrust, I think, noble lords might be grasping here, of what I'm going to say in the remainder of my speech is that we are being asked to empower the government to introduce a national registration scheme without being given any information as to what that scheme might contain. Now, this brings me to the remaining part of the letter that the committee received in reply to its polite inquiries. We asked some questions about how it would operate. But we were told by the Minister that none of these questions could be answered at this stage because they would all be the subject of public consultation. Now, public consultation is a very good and necessary thing. We have no criticism of the government for committing to undertake public consultation on the scheme. But you have to consult on something. You have to have some proposals that you are going to put to the public in order to elicit their opinion. And the question I have, as a result of reading the letter from the Minister, is whether the government has any idea at all of what they are going to put to the public. But if they do, and I very much hope they do, whether my noble friend will be able to say what they are. Hence the content of these 4 amendments, which I'm now just going to run through very briefly, because all of them are probing amendments, seeking an answer from the government to questions that we raised in our letter, because it seemed a very good thing to be able to give the government this opportunity here in committee to answer questions which it wasn't able to answer a few weeks ago. So Amendment 441 raises the question whether the government has it in mind that this should be a national and compulsory scheme, or one which has the local discretion which the committee favoured. We would like to know. Amendment 443 raises the question what the government means by a short-term let. It's put down as 90 days in the amendment, but that's for probing purposes. Do they mean 90 days, or what exactly is going to count as a short-term let for this purpose? And if they haven't got an exact figure, 90 days, 80 days, 100 days, could they give us a range of what they're thinking constitutes a short-term let before they go out to public consultation? The next question, the next amendment, 444, raises the question, and this was something I should have said the committee did agree on, that any national registration scheme shouldn't apply to rooms being let out in one's own home. The government, in fact, encourages people to let out rooms in their own home by giving them a tax break on the rental income received. So that appears to be one government policy. Is it the government's intention that to include rooms let out in one's principal home in a national registration scheme? And if so, how does that mesh with the tax credits and the signals given by the tax system to those who do so? And the final question we wanted to know was, how is this going to be paid for? Since whether it's a national scheme or a local scheme, it's almost certain to be implemented by local authorities, I would have thought, or they would have a major role in its implementation. How are they going to be remunerated for this? Fees, no doubt, are going to be charged. How high will the fees be? Will the local authority be able to set its own fees in local circumstances, or is it going to be limited to charging only on a cost recovery basis? This amendment proposes cost recovery, but it's not a proposal, it's a probing amendment. So it's a chance for the government to say what they're thinking about fees and remuneration for local authorities. So those are the 4 questions that we didn't feel we had proper answers to. I'm sure my noble friend will be able to give us some assurance and some answers when she rises to her feet on those matters and on the other matters I raised earlier. I will just say that apart from this very short debate, I think it's the case that noble lords will have no other opportunity, other than a report, to have a say on this scheme before it comes to be proposed and no doubt incorporated in a statutory instrument or in some other measure. So this is an important juncture, and one in which I think noble lords will want to hear some answers from my noble friend, as I do.
My lords, I rise in support of my noble friend, who I have to say is the